But I remember they came in with this box, and it was a huge box. And this was my medications for the first month.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Talking Health in the 406. I'm your host, Jennifer Van Sickle, longtime healthcare worker turned health educator. And this is the third and final installment of our podcast series with Melissa House. Let's listen back in as we hear her journey from type 1 diabetes to double organ transplant recipient. Okay, so let's loop back around to when you moved to Winnemucca, Nevada. So you went from Butte, Montana to a much, much smaller town. How was that? Can you take us back to that experience?
Sure. It was a scary experience, leaving what here, what I grew up with, here in Montana, to now going to somewhere smaller. And, especially when you have a chronic disease or, starting to deal with some of the things that I was seeing. I had high blood pressure, I had diabetes, and then the new stuff going on with my kidneys and what that looked like. It was a lot of unknown and a lot of uncertainty of am I going to get the care that I need? Do we have the resources available? And what does that look like? And I think, a lot of people think you have to be in a big city. You have to be somewhere where, everything is advanced technology and all this. And I don't necessarily feel that that's the case. The care and the experiences that I went through while I was dealing with all of this were amazing. You get that small town kind of care. Because I started working at the mine and then moved into a new position within the hospital, working on the ambulance. I was very fortunate. Not everybody gets this, but you do in a small town where I could just walk in to my doctor's back door. Anytime I had a question, anytime I needed anything, they were always there, to see me and, work through things if I had questions. I was on different meds and they were changing meds all the time. So, I had great care. I had access to great care.
A person doesn't always have to go to Seattle or to Salt Lake or somewhere else to find that great care.
Right. It's just finding the right connection and be willing to be open and have those conversations. And I think sometimes in a smaller town, you get more time with the provider. It's not that hurry up, in and out, really quick. You're just a number. You come in, what's your problem, out the door. And I know healthcare is shifting to those value-based services, but, sometimes in a small town, you get a little bit more of that one-on-one. You feel like you're a little bit more cared for. I was referred to a nephrologist for the kidney issues who was in Reno. So it was about 2 hours away. And I saw them on about every 3 months I would go in and see them. But they connected with my provider back in Winnemucca. So, it was a great way to connect the resources. It was never like, oh, we're in Reno, we're the big city, we're going to take care of you. There was always that connection there. And people were talking and making sure that, the care I was getting was quality care.
For you. And probably even your local pharmacist, I imagine, too. Your pharmacist would know what medications you were on and be another great resource, too, which we do have all over Montana as well.
Right. I can't say enough about the community pharmacists in a small town. In a lot of places, that's who people go to. That's who they trust. And I was, I'm going to go to Walmart and that's where I'm going to get my meds because, it's just the easiest, most convenient. But for a lot of stuff that I was on, Walmart couldn't get it or they couldn't keep it in stock. So there was a community pharmacy that I went to and it was great. They had the time to talk with you. They had the time to connect a little bit more about your medications and ask questions, and you could ask questions. So I cannot give enough credit to the community pharmacists. They're invested in your care. Mm-hmm. And again, you don't feel like a number coming in next,
right,
and out the door again.
Absolutely. Greeted on a first name basis. They, a lot of times they know exactly who's walking through the door.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. And so tell us about, your journey out of chronic kidney disease. You were having a rough time, hypertension. What happened? How did that story go?
Yeah, I think it was kind of the next phase in my learning process of, what journey am I on now? And I always kind of, again, looking back from my college years and the big shift, everything that I was going on was a journey. And I always felt like, hey, this is what was handed to me. Let's go with it. This is who I am.
Yep.
And it took a lot to get there, but this is my next journey. Let's just go with it. And I struggled. I had hard times, but I always tried to keep positive. And that was the one thing I told my nephrologist going through this journey is, all right, what's next? Let's bring it on. So it was crazy. It was learning about food all over again with, anybody with kidney disease has, you really have to look at different foods, learning about different medications, putting you on different things and different regimens of all of this kind of stuff. I remember the one they put me on, and I kind of laugh back, looking back at it today, but Rogaine, we all know Rogaine for hair growth. But it was originally, used for blood pressure.
Wow.
So it was called minoxidil. And they put me on that, and it causes hair growth. Let's just say that I had the best hair, thick hair that grew like crazy. I call it my monkey medicine that I was on. I had hair growth on my arms. It was miserable, I'll have to say. It was black and thick, and I think I had hair everywhere.
Oh my goodness.
But it was one of those life journeys. Am I dealing with that now? No. But at the time I was like, okay, this is ridiculous, and kind of crazy. But just kind of the funny things that you experience. And I can look back now and actually laugh. I hated it at the time. But I look back at pictures of my hair and I was like, oh man, I had thick, full hair. It was great. Yeah, but so those things, it was kind of learning all over again and figuring out, and working with my providers. And the one thing I did tell my nephrologist is I looked at him one day and I said, I'm never going to go on dialysis. And he looked at me, he's like, all right, that's a pretty lofty goal. And I said, no, I'm not going to go on dialysis. That's my goal. And I never did. Wow. I never had to go on dialysis. And it came, I was very fortunate, but it was another lifestyle change that I went through, changing my eating habits, exercising more, drinking more water. I swear I'm surprised I didn't drown. I drank so much water, but it was just kind of figuring that out. And the scary thing about all of this going through, there was probably things that I could have done early on, but people with chronic kidney disease, especially if you have diabetes or hypertension, any of those, which are the two leading causes of chronic kidney disease, it's scary because a lot of times you don't know you have any symptoms. Yeah. As I mentioned before, I had headaches. But I was young. I was in my 20s. I was working on the ambulance. I'd get off from my full-time job, go volunteer on the ambulance service, get a couple of hours of sleep, and then back at it. And I just contributed to stress, lack of sleep. So there was a lot.
20-something-year-old with no sleep and working all the time. Who wouldn't have a headache?
Yeah, exactly. So that is the one thing that, again, I keep talking about patient advocacy and, asking questions. Anybody that has any chronic condition, talk to your doctor about these things, because it's scary to think, 1 in 4 people, 1 in 3 people out there have chronic kidney disease and don't know they have
30 million adults in the United States, according to the National Kidney Foundation, have chronic kidney disease, and 80% are not aware of it.
It's frightening. It really is.
Scary, especially since it can be slowed. There can be steps in place.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of different things that they can do to really slow that progression. And, that's ultimately what I did. So I didn't have to go on dialysis. I was in stage 2 and I said, I'll never get to that point. And it progressed over the years. It was about 3 to 4 years that it progressed. But I slowed it down tremendously.
So even with your best efforts, you at least got time. It progressed, but it didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the point where I was at, I knew I wanted to be really proactive and aggressive with my treatment. So, after a few years, my nephrologist and I just started having conversations about the future and where we would go. And we started talking about transplant, and what that looked like. And I, again, I was like, all right, what's next? Let's look at this. Let's figure this out. Trying to be optimistic and also getting ahead of the game. Because I go back to, I don't want to go on dialysis. That's not where I want to go. So, I had a great healthcare team. And I'm sure they were probably sick of me because like I said before, I had a ton of questions and I was on board and I, came in with my list and we figured out stuff and I wanted a timeline. I wish I could be like that in just my everyday stuff.
Right.
But, with work and things. But I had a timeline and this is how we're going to move forward.
And so how did your dealing with CKD interact with your dealing with diabetes as well? Did you have any complications or issues with that?
Yeah, the one thing that was kind of scary is some of the meds that I were on for the chronic kidney disease, I could become unaware that my blood glucose level was dropping. So I could be perfectly fine having a conversation like we're having today. And the next thing, I would be completely out of it and not knowing what was going on. I can remember, working on the ambulance. We have lots of fun stories and, I love those guys to death. They were a great care and support team. But, some of the things that were funny, I was in Winnemucca, Nevada, and I called home to Butte one morning. And I can vaguely remember, but talking to my mom, and she knew I was off. She knew things were off. And so she was able to actually call my boss on the ambulance, Pat, and they were able to get into my house. They all knew and they always looked out for me. So they were able to get into my house, him and another paramedic. And, it's kind of scary when you come to and you wake up and there's two paramedics standing over you while you're laying in bed. That happened a couple of times. Wow. And it's like, what are you doing here?
Thank goodness you picked up the phone and called Mom in Butte.
Yeah.
Oh my,
yeah.
Wow.
But they knew, they would check on me and they knew kind of what I was going through. So I always, at times I was annoyed, like, seriously, leave me alone. What are you doing? But, it was really them being genuine and looking out for me and caring for me.
Great. That community support. That we have here in Montana as well.
Exactly. That small town, people look out for people, people know people.
Yeah.
I don't think you can replace that with big city just being a number.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
And so you're on visiting about transplants with your nephrologist. What happened? Was it years? Was it weeks? How did that all happen and go down?
Yeah, I wasn't really prepared for what was going to happen next. I remember we kind of had our final conversation. It was in October. In October of 2017 is when we kind of had this conversation. And I said, okay, let's go for it. Let's start thinking about it. Because I was at the point where I was borderline of, kind of crossing that line of being in that complete kidney failure.
Kind of the red zone of
kidney failure. Kind of the red zone,
huh?
yeah, exactly. And so we started having that conversation. I said, okay, let's do it. Let's move forward and start, working through the process. And so it started in October. And we went through that, looking at insurance, where would be the location. And what we were looking at was either Sacramento or San Francisco were the two kind of places that I was looking at. At the time, my insurance didn't cover Sacramento. So we, got on the coordinator's list with California Pacific Medical Center in San Francisco and kind of just started that process. So I had to go into Roseville, California. That was kind of the meeting place, and get tons of lab work, go through tons of testing, financial specialists, all of that kind of stuff. So it was a process, and that continued on for the next couple of months. And, this whole time they're telling you it can be anywhere from 3 to 5 years. That's the typical process for a kidney, is looking at 3 to 5 years. So I had no expectations of what was next. I was like, okay, we're just going to handle this. I remember getting a second cell phone because service was not great where we were at. So I had AT&T service and I had Verizon service, just hoping that, one of those would work, and I carried those with me everywhere. But I think I got cleared in January, end of January, first part of February with all the testing, and then I was active on the list.
Oh, okay.
And so, it was just that process of now the waiting game.
Yeah.
Just
Could be here for years, or I'm ready in case it's
in days.
Hour.
Yeah. And that's what they tell you. You just have to be ready. Have that bag packed. Like if you're waiting, to have a baby, have that go bag ready to go.
Good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it was just one of those things that just continue. So things continued. I didn't, I kind of stayed pretty even keel, didn't progress any further. Again, that was my goal, not going on dialysis. But it happened faster than I had expected. I was actually on the list for 8 months and 4 days.
Okay.
So, I was young, I was healthy. They do look at those things. It's not just you're number one on the list. They look at, the match. Of course, they have to match the alleles and the antibodies and all of that to make sure that you're a match. There's 6 of those that they look at. I was almost a perfect match. I matched 5 out of 6, which is crazy. That typically doesn't happen. You have to have 3 or more. So it was kind of a whirlwind. I remember it was a Sunday. We were in the middle of our EMS annual refresher training. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning. My husband was getting ready to go make the coffee down at the convention center where we were having the conference. And I got the call. And it was crazy. They're like, okay, we have a match. You need to come right now. And I was just like, what do I do? What do I do?
Sacramento. No, where did you have to go?
San Francisco.
San Francisco.
So I had to go from Winnemucca to San Francisco, which is about a 5-hour drive on a good day with no traffic.
Oh, yes.
It can take anywhere up to 7 hours, just depending on the traffic. So it was crazy. It was like packing the bag, grabbing stuff. I remember, and my mom still laughs, everybody's like, well, who did you call first? Your mom? I was like, no, I actually called my friend Debbie and let her know. And it was that shock, like, I don't know what to do. And she was like, have you called your mom? You need to call your mom and get your stuff and get in the car. And I was like, okay, let's go. And so we were just kind of, moving at like the speed of light, calling everybody. My family was gathering. My mom and dad and my aunt were driving to Salt Lake to get on a plane. My other aunt and my grandma were getting in the car and driving, and they would meet us there. Wow. So again, that family support, they were all coming from Montana. And so, we get in the car, and I don't remember how fast my husband drove, but we made it there in like 4 hours and 59 minutes. And I remember them calling me as I'm walking into the hospital. Where are you at? And I'm like, I'm outside, thinking they want me now. Like, I'm going into surgery right now. This is happening. But I get there and they get me checked in, and then it's like, okay, now you're going to wait. And now you're going to wait. I got there about 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. Mm-hmm. And it was crazy.
And
crazy whirlwind.
Had you signed up, so you were a double organ transplant, so pancreas and kidney. Mm-hmm. Had you signed up to receive both organs or just a kidney?
So I had the option. I could do kidney from a living donor. So if they found a living donor, I could do a kidney and then go in for a second surgery for a non-living donor for the pancreas. And I was like, no, I don't want 2 surgeries. So I just said, let's just wait until, we can, a non-living donor. And I had tons of people that were a match, friends and family. One of my best friend's mom was a match, but I was like, no, I want to wait. I'm at a good enough spot where I want to wait. I just do it all at once. But there was still a lot of unknowns. So my family got there.
And you were still waiting in the hospital, and your family had time to come from Montana, and you were still just waiting. Okay. Yep, and you were an inpatient, hooked up to IVs, still just waiting.
It was kind of crazy. They took me off my insulin when I got there, which I was not used to. So that was a kind of a roller coaster of experience. I think it was like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. They took me off my insulin. And they did it on purpose. They were trying to let my blood sugar rise. So when I went into surgery, but I didn't know what was going to happen. Kidney, they can look at and know, okay, this is a viable kidney. We're good to go. Pancreas, you don't know until it's actually removed from the individual, and they can physically put their eyes and hands on it to see if it's a viable organ.
Wow.
So I didn't go into surgery until like 3 o'clock on Monday morning. So I got there at 1 o'clock on Sunday and waited until 3 o'clock on Monday morning to go in. And they wheeled me down, everything. By this time, I was sick. I hadn't had insulin since like 12 hours prior. I was nauseated. They were giving me like antibiotics, antivirals, all of these medications like preemptively. So I felt horrible, and it was like, just put me under. I cannot wait to be put under. I was so scared and so nervous. I was crying, and it was just a huge emotional experience. And I remember when they came in and they said, the pancreas is viable, let's go. And it was a crazy emotional experience, like, here's my second shot kind of thing. And as I was wheeling out, my aunt, my mom, my dad were there, my husband was there, and I looked, and I remember I looked at my mom and my aunt, and I said, the anesthesiologist is really good looking, and he's going to see me naked. And they laughed, and that was the only thing that I could come up with at the time. Yeah. And I remember rolling back, and that was about it. My husband tells me they told him it would be about a 6-hour surgery.
Wow. Yeah.
The doctor came out after 3 hours, and I guess everybody just dropped. They were like, oh no, what happened? But it was a very easy surgery. It was successful right off the bat. It didn't take them as long as they had expected. So that was pretty exciting. I'm sure my family was like going, oh no, what happened? But everything was great. The surgery went phenomenal. I don't really remember much after the next few days. I know they got me up right away. The next morning, I was sitting up in a chair. My friend who was living in San Francisco at the time actually came and saw me, and I remember bits and pieces of that. But then it was just like, okay, here we go, the next adventure of my life. What happens next?
Yeah. And so did you get some of that education while you were staying in the hospital, or did you have to, kind of like with diabetes, go find your own advocate, from decades before to help you through it?
It was great. I have to say the transplant team was amazing. There was tons of different people, nurses everywhere, and they came in, and every day was like a learning experience where they were going through things. And there's a lot of stuff you have to do kind of preemptively to learn about the process, and they, talk about all the medications, but this was the time to really get down and dirty. And it's a very eye-opening experience. Like I said, I was like, okay, here's my second shot, at a healthy life. And here I go, ready to start this new adventure. It was really kind of eye-opening when they came in. I remember, they were bringing me my meds in. Some of them, they were giving me IV, because that's a huge change, the antiviral medications and immunosuppressants and all of that. But I remember they came in with this box. And it was a huge box. And this was my medications for the first month. I thought, oh, this is like the first 6 months. Oh no, it was the first month. And when I got out of the hospital and went home, I was on 18 medications in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and 15 in the evening.
Different medications.
So it was antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, anti-everything. Then I was on stomach meds. I was on an immunosuppressant for the kidney. I was on a different immunosuppressant for the pancreas, prednisone. They still had me on some blood pressure medications just to see how things were going. They immediately removed those medications. That was like the first thing to go. Because my blood pressure was like bottoming out, and I remember collapsing.
I got a kidney doing this for me.
Yep.
So you were dealing with that, and then you probably had big abdominal incisions, big cuts in your tummy where they had to put.
Yeah, very different. I didn't know a lot. Going into it, some of the things I didn't know, I thought they removed your native kidneys, which they don't. So native kidneys are in the lower back. My new kidney is on the left side, in the lower abdomen is where they place that. They only replace one and leave the old ones. And then my pancreas is actually attached to the bowel, on the left or the right side.
And did they remove your old pancreas? That's in there too?
Yep. They left. There's risk of bleeding and all of that kind of stuff. So they basically leave them there. The body is amazing what it does. It basically kind of redirects itself, and, you know, your body kind of takes over. So those kidneys kind of just eventually, completely shut down and, you know, kind of fade away. And the same thing with the pancreas.
So when you were on that donor list, were potential donors just coming out of California or like the Western U.S., or are we talking anywhere in the country is a fair game to come up with this donor for you when you guys were initially?
Yeah, there's thousands of people on the list from everywhere, you know, across the U.S. It's one big list of everybody. And there's a lot of different factors that go in, you know, age, health-wise, have you had a transplant before? And they kind of classify you, and that's kind of where you fall on the list. But yeah, it could have happened from anywhere. So it could have been an organ from, you know, the organs could have came from New York or Texas.
Wow.
I was very, very fortunate that my organs were they came from somebody in the hospital that was in the hospital there. So they didn't have to pack them and ship them. They were right there. So they, were harvested right there and immediately placed.
And so you're going through this change already mentally, you know, receiving 2 organs already. You're going to have a huge shift in your health. Did you have any guilt you had to process or feelings about the fact that this came from a deceased person? Were you having to pack and deal with that as well in addition to all this, or was it like, you know, thank you and I'm going to live my best life and move on? Did you have any issues with
it?
That
was mixed. I had a lot of mixed feelings about it. I accidentally kind of learned that it was from a younger child from a traumatic brain injury. Typically you don't know that unless the family lets you know. But in my medical records, I had my medical records when I was moving. And so I did find that stuff out. So that really hit hard, knowing that it was from, you know, a younger person who didn't get a chance to live life, you know, to their fullest. And, you know, to me, it felt like a sacrifice for that family just to give me another shot. I'm very, very grateful. It was overwhelming. It definitely was overwhelming to, you know, get to experience that. I had a kind of across the hall, there was an older lady who got the other kidney.
Oh, wow.
And actually lived in the area kind of where we did. So it was we were kind of buddies for a while. But yeah, it definitely was an emotional experience. It took me a few years after to write a letter to the family, because you can do that. I never did hear from them, but it took a number of years before I felt, you know, where I was ready to be able to do that. You know, it's definitely a different experience. I was so happy and so grateful, but it was hard. Yeah, it was really hard to adjust to that.
And so no more diabetes. Now diabetes is gone. Do you consider yourself cured of diabetes?
I wouldn't necessarily say I'm cured. I get asked that a lot because I love to share my story. I love to pass on, you know, what I've learned. And I do get that a lot, like, you're cured now. And I wouldn't say that I'm cured. Yes, I don't have to check my blood sugar. I don't have to take insulin. But is there a risk that I could redevelop diabetes? Absolutely. So I don't think that I'm completely cured. You know, just having a transplant is not a cure. It was almost trading one thing for another. Because now that I don't have to worry about the diabetes, there's so many other things that I have to think about in, you know, my daily life. I'm on medications for the rest of my life. So, you know, getting in that regimen, 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. That's my...
And how many medications? Are we still talking 18 or is it less?
No, I am on a lot less now. I actually take 3 main medications. I'm still on prednisone. I'll have to take that. And then I take the 1 immunosuppressant for the kidney and 1 for the pancreas. I'm on very low doses. I'm on the the minimum doses. So, you know, I still have to get annual visits with my care team, my nephrologist, the kidney doctor, and they, you know, monitor all of that. I get my blood drawn every 3 months. So again, I replaced one thing for another. But there's a lot of other things that I have to consider now. Yeah, I'm still on meds. I have to take a pre-antibiotic before I go to the dentist because
Really?
risk of infection. So, I'm at 10 times a higher risk for skin cancer. So, having to apply the sunscreen everywhere I go. So, it's replacing one risk for another. Do I live a better, healthier life? Absolutely. I'm able to do so many more things, and it's easy to manage. But flu season, during the pandemic and things right now, it's not easy. You have to be so much more cautious. My body doesn't have a regular immune system and can't fight things off. So a common cold for you would be a week, 2 weeks. For me, it could last up to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So my body just takes time to process things. And again, pre-meds for this, pre-meds for that.
Right. And walking down the street, I would never know it. I'm sitting here for the listeners looking at Melissa, and she's, still healthy, young, fit. I would never know just seeing you in the street that you're immunocompromised or that you have to be this cautious. Yeah.
Yeah. There's just a lot of new things. So you replace one thing for the other. Diet. I still have to think about that. Do I get the cupcake or the brownie or cheesecake, which is my favorite? Yeah. I definitely treat myself to that more than I did before, but it's not an everyday thing. I still have to watch protein intake and I have to do all of that. Immunizations, making sure that I'm getting those and labs and making sure, adjusting medication. So it's still dealing with some of the things that I did before, but in a kind of a different light, in a different aspect. I feel better. I feel healthier. Don't have as many restrictions. But sometimes I replaced one thing for another.
Yeah. And are you still having to go to San Francisco for all of this care? What do you do for that?
No. So after my surgery, I stayed in Nevada. And then we made the big decision to move to Colorado. So again, now going from, getting comfortable in that small town care again to the big city. And I was like, okay, what happens next? And things that you don't typically think of, but okay, now I have to change my provider, and I'm really comfortable with this person. I was very fortunate that my provider at the time actually did his residency with my current provider at Anschutz Medical Campus in Denver. So just made a direct referral, and I was able to get into them. But, that's one of the things. I was excited for this opportunity now to go to Colorado with all of, medical advances and, just being where there was more resources. And I thought, oh, this is a great opportunity to, continue my journey. And, cause I think I was 3 years post-transplant when we moved. So I was like, oh, I've got, lots of things available to me if I have complications, whatever that's going to look like. And I don't necessarily think that was the case. One of the things that I learned about being in the city, it was no more walking in the back door of your provider's office.
Right.
No more. You could pick up the phone and call them directly. I felt more like a number when I would go to place. I didn't feel like people knew me or knew my history, which was a big learning curve. With the exception of, my current nephrology and transplant team. I mean, they really know you and get to know you and all of that. But it was a very different experience than what I was used to growing up in Montana and then moving to Winnemucca. So that, again, I think that was the kind of the next phase. And how am I going to handle this, and continuing to grow in my career and looking at family and all of those kind of things. So it's like, oh boy, this is a new adventure. Bigger is not always better is one of the things that I say,
Absolutely.
Thinking about that.
Absolutely. And so you lived in Colorado for several years, and then you moved back to Montana. And so how is that transition? Are you able to have care here, or do you have to go to Colorado for your transplant?
Yeah. Montana is always home to me. It always has been my home. And same with my husband. He grew up here in Montana as well. And, we have a daughter and all of our families here. So we always knew we would come back, but didn't think it would ever happen how it did. I got laid off from a job. They were downsizing, and I was looking, and my husband said, well, let's take a look. And so it was I think it was perfect timing. It was the perfect time. And it was like, I got the job as being the diabetes program manager, which for me was probably one of the most exciting things that could happen, because it was like, I've lived with this. I know what it's like, real life experience. And now to be able to work in this role was so exciting, just for an opportunity to kind of give back and do that. So yeah, it was, okay, here we go on a move again. And there was a lot of things. I was doing really well. I have, had 0 complications since after initial surgery, and things have been going well. And it was like, oh, here I'm moving to Montana. We don't have a transplant center. What is that going to look like? So that was all coming back. I know what I had here before, but now what it's going to look like 17 years later since I moved, and 10 years since the transplant. What is this going to look like? And so it was kind of scary. It really was. Here I'm going back to a more rural state with not a lot of options. But again, I don't think always bigger is better. I'm very fortunate. I still get to work with my transplant team in Colorado. So I see them. They kicked me out. I'm boring to them, which, hey, on my end, being boring is amazing.
Boring,
yes,
awesome.
We love it.
Absolutely.
So I still meet with them once a year. I typically like to go down to see them, because then I get to see all my friends and everyone in Colorado. But this past year with the pandemic and not risking traveling, I was able to do a telehealth visit, which was amazing. It was still a really dedicated call talking about how I was doing and, checking in on my care, checking in on my labs. And it was still a very personable experience. So we're very fortunate to have that opportunity here. So yeah, I still work with them, but I also have amazing providers that work with my provider in Colorado, and they connect. So every time that I go in, so here in Helena, I'm getting just as good care as I was in Denver or in San Francisco or in Winnemucca. It's amazing to see just the shifts. And so being in a smaller town or a rural state, there's not a lack of resources. And I think that's one of, another big point is even somebody who's dealing with a chronic condition, there are resources available. It's just taking the time to find the right person that fits to you.
Absolutely.
I have amazing providers here, like I mentioned, and I don't feel like anything's changed. I feel like it's just continued.
Awesome. And so then you moved back to Helena, and life kind of came full circle when you took your diabetes program manager position. And I hear you actually got to see, had a blast from the past with somebody you encountered working in the diabetes program.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy, and you never think about it. You forget how small, Montana is, on a certain scale. But at one of my first meetings here with the diabetes program and working with some of our lifestyle coaches from our prevention program, I walked into the room and there was a lady sitting across from me, and I just kept staring at her. She probably thought I was crazy, but I was staring at her. I was like, gosh, she looks so familiar. And I just couldn't place it. And the lady that she was with, I knew her because she was one of my really good friend's bosses when we were in high school and college. So I knew her, and I was like, well, she's from Butte. Like, who is this person? And then it kind of clicked when I heard her name and her talking, and we were talking, and it clicked. So it really did come full circle. She was the nurse at the time who actually diagnosed me at the urgent care with diabetes.
So the day you walked in, there she was, and now here she is again.
Exactly. So, she diagnosed me at the time. Again, she was working in the urgent care, so didn't have, much more experience with her, but making full circle. And now I'm working with her on a different level is incredible. Just to make those connections and continue those connections. It's kind of a crazy world we live in.
Absolutely. And yes, and especially in Montana, because we really are one community under the big sky, as our tagline goes. And that just kind of proves that.
So, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Melissa, and sharing your incredible story and all the journeys that you've gone through. We definitely appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to Melissa for sharing her incredible journeys with us. Please remember to tune in for future episodes. Like, subscribe, and share to help ensure the success of our podcast. We'll see you again next time. But for now, thanks for joining us for this episode of Talking Health in the 406, where we're one community under the big sky. Until then, take care.